At 9:32 on 9 April 1945, in the low, cold light of a German spring morning, one M4 Sherman lay nose down in a roadside drainage ditch north of Göttingen. Ahead of it, three shapes emerged from a line of fir trees, black against the pale fields. 70-ton silhouettes with long, needle-thin guns, Königstiger, Tiger II's. Inside the cramped turret, the intercom hissed. 3 o'clock, 800 meters. Jesus, that's Tigers, the gunner whispered. The tank was part of a 3rd Armored Division column pushing east. 15 minutes earlier, it had been just another vehicle in a long file of Shermans and half-tracks rolling at 15 kilometers per hour, engines humming, tracks ticking over broken asphalt, and farm tracks. Then the first 88mm round came in. It hit the lead tank at 1,500 meters, a yellow-white flash and a column of black smoke. The column concertinaed in seconds, drivers braking, some instinctively pulling right into soft ground, others swerving left. In that chaos, one Sherman skidded, slid halfway into a drainage ditch and stopped at an angle. Its name chalked on the gun barrel was Belle. We will call her commander Staff Sergeant David Miller. He was 23 years old, from Ohio, and at that moment his world had shrunk to the periscope in front of his right eye and the steady, hungry advance of 3 Tiger IIs, angling toward the road. "Back us up, Eddie," he shouted. "I'm spinning, Sarge. Left track's in the mud. She's just digging," the driver replied, voice tight. The transmission whined uselessly. Belle was stuck. Not catastrophically. She could pivot, adjust a little, but she would not be racing anywhere. In front of her, 2 burning Shermans blocked the road to the rear. The column was reversing, throwing smoke, trying to get off the line of fire. Miller had perhaps 30 seconds before the Tigers cleared the trees and had an unobstructed shot. He knew the numbers. At 800 meters, the German 8.8 centimeter KWK-43 could punch through his 63mm sloped glacis as if it were paper. His own 75mm M3 gun, with standard armor piercing, could not hope to penetrate the front plate of a Tiger II at any combat range they were likely to see. On paper, this was suicide. "Loader, up," he snapped. "What have you got?" "AP in the breech, 3 more AP, 4 HE, and..." The loader hesitated, hand on the racks. 6 smoke, Willie Pete. Or white phosphorus. Miller watched the nearest Tiger II, turret already swinging, its long, high-velocity barrel searching for shapes on the road. The German tank moved at maybe 20 kilometers per hour, heavy bow nosing through the soft field, exhausts trailing grey vapor in the cold air range now, 700 meters and closing. AP's useless front on, Miller said, more to himself than the crew. He exhaled once, long and slow, fighting down the urge to order a blind reverse that the transmission could not give him. Then he made the decision that would turn one doomed Sherman into a weapon the German designers had never calculated for. "Gunner, on the lead. Tiger," he said quietly. "Loader, ditch the AP. Give me white phosphorus in the tube." The loader's eyes flicked to his for a fraction of a second. They had been told WP was for screening smoke, for marking targets, for infantry. Nobody had said anything about using it to attack the crew inside a Tiger, but orders were orders. "Willie Pete up!" A 30-meter-tall German oak lined up in Miller's sight picture, then slid aside as he tracked right to follow the Tiger's sloped glacis plate. He whispered a range, 650. And the gunner's hands settled on the elevation wheels. 3 Tigers, 1 Sherman, and 30 tons of American steel betting everything on a smoke shell. Before the first white phosphorus shell leaves Belle's gun, it is worth understanding the math that says this fight should already be over. The M4 Sherman was a 30-ton medium tank. In Miller's configuration, a late-war M4 with a 75mm M3 gun, welded hull and a radial gasoline engine, it carried about 63mm of armor on the glacis plate, sloped at 56 degrees. Side armor was 38 mm. The turret front was 76 mm. Against most threats in 1942, those numbers were acceptable. Against a Tiger II in 1945, they were tragic. The Königstiger weighed close to 70 tons. Its frontal hull armor was 150 mm thick, sloped at 50 degrees. The turret face ran up to 180 mm. Its gun, the 8.8 cm KWK 43L71, could hurl an armor-piercing round at roughly 1,000 meters per second. In combat tests, that gun could punch through an angled Sherman hull from well over 2,000 meters and a Sherman turret front from around 1,800 75mm firing standard APCBC would have needed to hit the thinner side armor of the Tiger II, and even then at ranges under 1,000 meters to have a realistic chance frontally, it might damage optics, track links, external fittings. Penetration was almost out of the question. Then there was optics and fire control. German rangefinders and Zeiss sights gave Tiger crews a clarity and precision most Sherman crews could only envy. Their turret traverse was slower than the Sherman's powered system, but at typical engagement distances across European fields, 800 to 1,500 meters, they could kill long before an M4 could answer. On paper, it took 4 or 5 Shermans, maneuvering to the flanks and rear, to reliably kill a single Tiger. That was the compromise the US Army accepted. Lots of reliable, mechanically simple medium tanks, backed by artillery and air power instead of fewer, heavier monsters. The Germans built about 489 Tiger IIs in total. The Americans built over 49,000 Shermans of all types. Statistically, that made sense at the level of armies. For the 5 men inside Belle, the statistics were a death sentence presented in millimeters and meters per second. Miller knew all this not as an engineer, but as a man who had watched 75mm armor-piercing rounds bounce off a Panther's frontal armor in Normandy at 600 meters. He had seen an Allied tank destroyed by a single 88mm hit, turret lifted, crew gone in an instant. Every tanker in 3rd Armored had heard the same warnings. Never take a Tiger head-on, flank it, call for air, pull back, let tank destroyers with 76mm guns and high-velocity ammo handle it. But doctrine and reality rarely met on the tidy diagrams of training manuals. On the 9th of April, the tank destroyers were elsewhere. The fighter bombers were grounded by low cloud. The column had rounded a bend north of Göttingen, the road hemmed in by soft fields and tree lines, and the Tigers were already in position, so the math changed. Instead of armor thickness and penetration charts, Miller had speed of turret traverse, smoke density, the suction of a Tiger's ventilation fan, and the psychological breaking point of men sealed in a steel box filling with burning phosphorus. He was not going to kill a Tiger II the way the manuals described. He was going to try to kill the idea of invincibility inside the minds of its crew. Staff Sergeant David Miller had not grown up dreaming of fighting German heavy tanks. He grew up fixing tractors. On a farm outside Lima, Ohio, his world was measured in furrow lengths and seasons, in the sound of a worn-out gearbox on a 20-year-old Alice Chalmers. By 17, he knew how to listen to a machine and tell whether it was about to fail. When the draft notice came in 1942, the Army decided that talent belonged in armor. At Fort Knox, he met the Sherman for the first time. Fresh olive drab paint, the smell of preservative grease and fuel, the clang of boots on steel in the training yard, instructors walked them through the numbers. 5-man crew, 400 horsepower engine, 75mm gun with a muzzle velocity of 619 meters per second for armor piercing, about 620 for white phosphorus smoke. They learned how to service the vertical volute suspension, how to pull and clean a clogged air filter, how to swap out a track block in the mud. They learned gunnery tables and range estimation, the parabolic arc of a shell plotted against a silhouette board on a Kentucky hillside. But more than anything, they learned roles Miller started as a loader, sweaty and bruised from hauling 15-kilogram shells in the cramped turret. He watched gunners work the elevation and azimuth wheels, listened to commanders call out ranges with a confidence he did not yet feel. He felt the tank commander's job was part math, part nerve. By the time he shipped to England with the 3rd Armoured Division in early 1944, he was a gunner. By late summer in Normandy, after his first commander was killed by shrapnel and the second evacuated with burns, he wore the commander's headphones himself. The war taught him fast. In hedgerows outside Saint-Lô, he learned the value of high-explosive rounds against dug-in infantry. In September, at the edge of the Göttingen forest, he watched German 75mm anti-tank guns punch through Shermans at 900 meters. In the Ardennes that winter, he saw what a Panther could do to a careless column on a snowy road. Through it all, the Sherman became less a machine and more an extension of his body. He knew the slight lag in the hydraulic turret traverse, the exact pressure on the pedals Eddie, his driver, preferred. He knew how long it took his loader, Ruiz, to extract an AP round from the ready rack versus reaching down into the hull racks. He also learned fear. He saw burned-out Shermans in every village, turrets askew, tracks blown. He heard the nickname whispered, Ronson, like the lighter, Light's first time. The official pamphlets talked about self-sealing fuel lines and wet stowage-reducing fires. The charred hulks by the roadside suggested otherwise. By 1945, he had developed a quiet pact with his crew. No heroics for glory, no unnecessary risks, use artillery whenever possible. Use smoke. Move. Never sit in the open longer than 20 seconds. Yet on the morning of 9th April, rounding a bend north of Göttingen, Miller's tank would be forced into exactly the kind of stand-up fight he had spent 2 years avoiding, and the only tool left in his hands would be a type of shell he had fired dozens of times, but never at armor. The night before the ambush, Miller lay on the warm engine deck of Lucy Belle, staring up at a low German sky the color of gunmetal. They were lagered in an orchard south of Göttingen. The division had pushed hard all day, covering nearly 30 kilometers on secondary roads. Rotating point companies, dodging pockets of resistance and blown bridges. Word from higher headquarters was simple. Keep moving east, don't give the enemy time to dig in. Beside him on the engine deck lay a worn, oil-stained recognition booklet. On one page, a Panther, on another, a Tiger Eye. On the next, a grainy side view of a Tiger II, hull plates sharply angled, turret massive and box-like. He'd seen Panthers. He'd heard of Tiger fans. B. Tiger IIs were still stories, rumors from other divisions, photographs in training lectures. They say front plates 6 inches thick, Ruiz had said that afternoon, flipping the booklet. 6 inches. We bounce off that all day, Sarge. Miller had shrugged, but the words stuck. Later, at the company briefing under a camouflaged half-track, the captain had jabbed at a map spread over a crate. The terrain north of Göttingen was a mix of rolling fields, patches of forest, small villages clustered around crossroads. Resistance is scattered, the captain said. Volkssturm, some 88s, maybe a few self-propelled guns. Panzer units are supposed to be further east. If you get anything heavier than a Mark IV, you call it in. Don't be heroes. Don't be heroes. Use smoke. Maneuver. The same doctrine notes, repeated since Normandy. Back at the tank, Miller and his gunner checked ammo. The racks held the usual mix. Armor-piercing, high explosive, smoke. The smoke rounds, M64 white phosphorus, were there mostly because someone at battalion insisted every tank carry them. Officially, they were marking rounds, for ranging and for laying quick battlefield obscuration. Miller had used them that way many times. A WP shell detonating 50 meters short of a hedgerow would throw up a blinding white cloud within seconds, its burning fragments clinging to branches and earth. Infantry appreciated that curtain when crossing open ground, but over the months he'd noticed something else. Remember that Stu G near Stolberg? he asked the gunner now, conversationally. "The one we hit short with smoke?" "Yeah. You see what happened when the fragments hit its engine deck?" The gunner nodded. Whole back end lit up. Smoke pouring in through the grills. They bailed fast. Miller turned a WP shell in his hands, feeling the weight. Inside, not explosives in the usual sense, but a canister of white phosphorus, a substance that ignited on contact with air, burning at around 800 degrees Celsius, generating thick phosphorus pentoxide smoke. Nasty to infantry, worse inside a confined space. German tanks, he knew, relied on powerful engine and turret fans to clear cordite fumes. Those same fans, faced with a cloud of burning phosphorus fragments, might suck in a different kind of smoke. What if you couldn't punch through the armor, he wondered, but you could make the inside of the tank uninhabitable? It was not doctrine. It was not in any manual. It was merely an observation, born of too many nights watching German crews abandon vehicles when they thought they were on fire. Miller did not say anything to the captain. He did not write it up in a report. He simply noted, quietly, that if he ever had to face something like that silhouette in the booklet, the Tiger II, frontally, white phosphorus might be his only card. The battlefield would soon give him the chance to test that grim hypothesis. U.S. armored doctrine in 1945 was clear on paper. Tanks were to exploit breakthroughs, support infantry, and avoid duels with enemy heavy armor whenever possible. Tank destroyer battalions, armed with higher velocity guns, were supposed to counter German panzers. Artillery and fighter bombers would soften up strong points. Combined arms would dilute the strengths of any single enemy weapon. Reality, especially in the fast-moving final months of the war, rarely followed that script. Miller had sat through more than one lecture from battalion staff officers about proper employment of Shermans. They emphasized maneuver, massed fire, and the avoidance of frontal attacks. They warned against wasting specialized ammunition. White phosphorus was a limited stock. Using it frivolously could get a commander chewed out. WP is for smoke and marking, a major had said flatly during a winter briefing. Not for shooting at tanks. You want a Tiger dealt with, you call the tank destroyers or air. In the Ardennes, Miller had watched tank destroyers bogged down in snowbanks and fighter bombers grounded by fog. He had listened to the crack of 8.8s in the trees and watched his platoon commander's tank disappear in a ball of flame. The paperwork and doctrine did not change the simple fact that, at the front of a column on a narrow road, the first tank in line often saw the enemy alone. Each time he filled out after-action reports, he felt the weight of what he did and did not write. He reported ranges, types of engagement, ammunition expended. He did not always record when he had ordered a risky move that paid off, or a cautious pause that may have saved lives. There was another conflict, more personal. Miller knew what white phosphorus did to flesh. He had seen infantry hit by German WP grenades, saw the way fragments clung and continued burning underwater. He had heard the screams of men caught in that kind of fire. Using such a substance deliberately against a tank crew, even an enemy crew sat uneasily with him. Inside a Tiger II were 5 men, not unlike his own crew, a commander watching through optics, a gunner tracking targets, a driver sweating over controls, a loader bruising his arms on shell casings, a radio operator who might be on his first combat day. They believed in their machine, just as Miller believed in his. But the war had a way of stripping moral choices to their barest core. His duty was to his crew first. If the only way to keep Eddie at the controls, Ruiz on the loader's stool, and the gunner alive was to make 5 men in another steel box bail out in panic, then he would do it. On the morning of the 9th of April, as the column rolled, another bit of bureaucracy intruded. A supply sergeant had tried to swap his 75mm Sherman for a newer 76mm model. Miller's company commander declined. The new tanks were going to another battalion designated as the division's spearhead. So Lucy Belle drove toward Göttingen with a gun that could not penetrate a Tiger II frontally and a rack of white phosphorus shells officially intended for smoke screens. Doctrine would not be there when the first 88mm shell came in. Paper orders would not hear the hiss of incoming, feel the tank lurch as tracks bit mud, or listen to the shallow, frightened breathing on the intercom. When the moment came, Miller would have to choose between what the manuals said and what the battlefield demanded. The ambush unfolded in seconds. The column was moving at a cautious 15 kilometers per hour, second gear, as it crested a low rise and descended toward a shallow valley fields, stretched left and right, brown and green patchwork bordered by tree lines. Visibility, roughly 1,500 meters. The first indication of danger was not sight, but sound, a distant crack like tearing canvas, followed a heartbeat later by a sharper, nearer whiplash. Then the impact. The lead Sherman, 200 meters ahead of Lucy Belle, erupted in a flash of orange, turret shrouded in soot. An 88mm round had punched through somewhere in the front hull. The tank rolled to a stop, smoke pouring from the hatches. Its crew did not emerge. "Contact front, long," Miller shouted. "Smoke! Get off the road!" The column reacted instinctively. Some drivers swung right into the soft field, others left smoke discharges popped, laying a hasty white curtain. In that confusion, Lucy Belle's right track slid into the drainage ditch, clay giving way, hull tilting. Eddie tried to power out, but the bogie wheels simply churned mud. "Can you move?" Miller barked. "I can pivot and creep, but we're not climbing out fast," Eddie replied. Another 88mm report, another impact, this time a half-track in the rear, its payload of infantry scattering into the fields. Through his periscope, Miller finally saw them. Dark shapes at the edge of the far tree line, maybe 1,200 meters out, just north of a farmhouse. "Tigers," his gunner murmured. The German tanks began to advance, using the slight depression of the field as cover, their bows dipping and rising, their guns flashed again, methodical, each shot spaced by the disciplined cycle of loading and aiming. A second Sherman caught fire. The road was now partially blocked by burning wrecks. Behind, the rest of the column was reversing, trying to find alternate routes. For the moment, Lucy Belle was one of the few tanks with a clear line of sight forward. Miller's earlier musings on white phosphorus crystallized into a decision. "Loader, WP," he ordered. "Up!" Ruiz slammed the shell into the breech, closed it with a metallic clack. "Gunner, take the lead Tiger, range 650, aim low on the glacis, just above the driver plate. We're not going through him, we're going to smoke him." The Tiger II was still moving, but slowly, turret swinging from its perspective. The Shermans were shapes in and around a smeared line of smoke. Lucy Belle, angled in the ditch, was less obvious, hull partly masked by the road embankment. Miller steadied his breathing. The reticle found the sloped front plate of the German tank, a dull yellow-brown rectangle amid the green-grey. "On," the gunner said. "Fire." The 75mm recoiled, the tank rocking slightly. The WP shell traced an almost flat arc, closing the 650 meters in less than a second. For a heartbeat, Miller thought they had missed. Then the impact bloomed on the Tiger's front like a small sun. White fragments splashed across the glacis and the lower turret face, each splinter igniting and spreading more. Smoking phosphorus. A roiling cloud of dense white smoke began to envelop the German tank, crawling over its hull, sucked down by the hot metal. Inside the Tiger, too, 5 men suddenly found their world transformed. The clang of the hit, the sudden loss of visibility as every periscope and visor went white, and then the smell. Acrid, choking, a chemical bite in the lungs as the ventilation fan dutifully pulled the smoke into the fighting compartment. From Lucy Belle, they saw the Tiger hesitate. Its gun, mid-swing, stopped. The tank's advance slowed to a crawl. "Loader, another WP, same target," Miller snapped. In that moment, his idea stopped being a theory formed on an engine deck and became a weapon tested in the only laboratory that mattered, a German field, under fire. The second white phosphorus round struck just as the Tiger II began to break. This time it hit higher on the mantlet and turret roof. Burning fragments cascaded over the cupola, lodging in weld seams, bouncing off vision blocks. The white cloud thickened, billowing, until the entire forward third of the tank was a roiling mass of smoke and ghostly flame. Through his periscope, Miller watched for the only sign that mattered: the hatches. For a few agonizing seconds, nothing moved. The Tiger's gun remained frozen, slightly off to Lucy Belle's left, as if still tracking a different Sherman. The second and third Tigers, still emerging from the tree line, adjusted their advance, fanning slightly to widen their field of fire. "They're going to range us in," the gunner said quietly. "Let's make sure the first one's out," Miller replied. "Loader, third WP, same tank." He was violating every ammunition conservation lecture he'd ever heard. But this was no longer about statistics. It was about forcing a decision inside that German turret. The third shell detonated low, near the right track, adding another layer of smoke and fire. Now the Tiger II was almost completely obscured. Only the faint outline of its silhouette showed through the smoke. Then, finally, a hatch on the turret roof flew open. A figure scrambled out, half crouched, mask on, arms flailing. Another followed, then another, dropping onto the armor, trying to get clear of the burning fragments. The driver's hatch clanged open on the front hull, and a fourth man tumbled to the ground. "They're bailing," Ruiz shouted. "Good," Miller said, his voice flat. "Leave it. Next Tiger." The second Tiger, too, had halted at about 800 meters, perhaps momentarily confused by its sister tank's sudden blindness. Now its turret snapped toward the ditch where Lucy Belle lay. The long 88 barked, muzzle flash bright even in daylight. "Down!" Miller yelled. The round cracked overhead, close enough that the tank's crew felt the air slap. It struck the far embankment, showering dirt and fragments. "Gunner! Tiger II! WP! Range 700!" Miller ordered. "On! Fire!" The Sherman's 75mm roared again. The smoke round flew, this time impacting just below the Tiger's gun, splashing up onto the mantlet and around the base of the turret. Once again, white fire blossomed, smoke pouring over the tank. The German gunner tried to fire again, but his optics were gone, the world outside replaced by an opaque, swirling fog. Inside the turret, the fan pulled in choking fumes. The commander had seconds to decide whether to stay blinded inside a potentially burning tank or abandon his armored invincibility for the open field and small arms fire. From Lucy Belle, the cycle repeated. First the hesitation, then the frantic opening of hatches, the dark forms scrambling over steel. "Two down, at least for now," Miller said. "Loader, WP count." "Two left, Sarge." The third Tiger II was now the greatest threat. Its commander, seeing two of his platoon mates suddenly engulfed in smoke and abandoned, had a decision of his own to make. He chose aggression. The tank accelerated, angling to the right, perhaps to flank the ditch. Its gun traversed quickly, trying to pick out the Sherman that had clearly found some trick. "Eddie, pivot us left. Keep our nose toward him," Miller ordered. "Make us a smaller target." Lucy Belle's tracks bit and spun in the mud, but the driver managed to yaw the hull enough to keep the glacis roughly facing the threat. The ditch limited their movement, but also presented a smaller silhouette. "Range?" the gunner asked. 600, Miller guessed, watching the German tank close. He had 2 WP rounds left and a rack of armor-piercing that would likely only scratch paint at this angle. The German had an 88mm shell ready that could flip their world upside down. For a heartbeat, the battlefield narrowed to a single equation: who would land the next effective hit first? Miller forced himself to slow his breathing. Loader, WP. We're betting the last of our smoke on this one, he said quietly. Up. Gunner, steady. We miss, we're done. The third Tiger the Soyuz turret stopped, its gun now aligned, stabilizers settling. 2 crews, 2 guns, 2 shells. Trial by fire, in its purest form. The third Tiger II never fired that shot at Lucy Belle. A burst of .50 caliber fire stitched across its upper hull from the left. Another Sherman, half hidden behind a barn, had finally found its nerve and its line of sight. The heavy machine gun rounds did not penetrate, but they hammered at optics and periscopes, distracting the gunner at a critical instant. Miller seized the opening. Fire! The last white phosphorus round leapt from Lucy Belle's gun, crossing the 600 meters in a heartbeat. It struck just left of the Tiger's gun, splashing fragments over the mantlet, and the turret ring smoke again poured, thick and white, enveloping the German tank. Within a minute, hatches opened. Figures jumped, some stumbling as they hit uneven ground, one rolling, clutching at a smouldering sleeve. The Tiger II, blind and crewless, ground to a halt, engine idling like some abandoned mechanical beast. Only then did Miller exhale fully. AP next. We're out of WP, Ruiz reported. Good. We may need it for whatever else is out there, Miller replied, though his hands were trembling slightly on the cupola rim. The firefight tapered off. With the Tiger platoon effectively gutted, 2 abandoned under clouds of phosphorus smoke, 1 immobilized and later finished off by artillery, the German ambush collapsed infantry who had been huddled in the tree line waiting to exploit the expected American panic instead found themselves under suppressive fire from emboldened Shermans and half-tracks. Within an hour, the valley was in U.S. hands. Engineers moved to drag the burning wrecks from the road. Medics worked among the shattered vehicles. Prisoners, including ashen-faced German tankers, were marched to the rear, coughing and red-eyed. That evening, in a makeshift company command post inside a commandeered farmhouse, Miller tried to put the day into words on an after-action report. Engaged 3 Piske PFW Tiger, probable Tiger II, at approximately 650 to 800 meters, he wrote. Gun 75 mm. Ammunition expended. 6 rounds WP, 4 rounds AP, 3 rounds HE-WP rounds impacted on frontal armor resulted in heavy smoke around target. Observed enemy crews exiting vehicles shortly thereafter. He hesitated, then added a line. Recommend further study of WP smoke shells as anti-tank suppressant of crew via ventilation intake and obscuration of optics. The Battalion S3, a career officer with stacks of such reports on his desk, noticed those few sentences. Later, at regimental debrief, the incident was mentioned. An M4 with a 75 mm gun forcing the abandonment of 2 Tiger IIs without a single penetrating hit. Within days, the story moved along the informal channels that mattered most. Word of mouth between tank crews. At a fuel dump, a sergeant from another company cornered Miller. "We heard you smoked out 2 Tigers with Willie Pete," he said, half incredulous. Miller shrugged. "Couldn't go through them. So, we went around the problem. No official field manual would be rewritten overnight. The primary role of WP remained smoke and marking. Questions about its ethical use lingered in the background, rarely voiced amidst the chaos of a collapsing front. But quietly, the incident north of Göttingen joined the growing body of small, hard-won lessons that experienced crews used to bend doctrine to reality. Tanks started carrying a few extra WP rounds when they could. Commanders briefed their gunners on the possibility of using smoke directly against enemy armor in emergencies. The idea that heavy German tanks were invulnerable from the front took another small, important dent. Not from a more powerful gun, but from a creative use of chemistry and crew psychology. In the great statistical ledger of the war, it was a tiny entry. 1 Sherman, several Tigers neutralized. For the men who heard the story and tucked it away for the next time they saw a long-barreled 88 on the horizon, it was much more than that. The war ended for Miller a few weeks later, not in a blaze of glory, but on a muddy road where Belle finally ran out of luck. Near a small town in central Germany, an unseen anti-tank gun, no Tiger this time, just a well-placed 75mm, hit the Sherman low on the right side. The round punched through the thinner hull, shredding track and road wheels. The tank ground to a halt, smoke seeping from the rear. "Out, out, out," Miller yelled, already pushing the hatch open. They bailed in practiced sequence, rolling into a roadside ditch as another round struck the now empty hull. The Sherman burned steadily, ammunition cooking off in dull thumps. For the crew, watching from cover, it was like seeing a living thing die. By then, though, the German army was collapsing. Within days, organized resistance crumbled. When the ceasefires came, Miller found himself in a world suddenly without the constant hum of engines and the ever-present tension of the next bend in the road. Demobilization took months. In 1946, he stepped off a train back in Ohio, duffel bag on his shoulder, ribbons on his chest. The farm was still there. The tractors still broke down. His father handed him a wrench like nothing had changed. But something had. At night, in the quiet of a Midwestern bedroom, he sometimes heard the crack of an 88mm, smelled white phosphorus in his imagination, saw the ghost-white clouds enveloping Tigers north of Göttingen. He remembered the stunned faces of German tankers stumbling out of armor they had been told was invincible. Years passed. He used the GI Bill to study mechanical engineering, trading field repairs under fire for drafting tables and slide rules. He married, raised children who knew the war only as a vague story their father rarely discussed. In the 1960s, he visited an armor museum during a business trip. There, in a high-roofed hall, stood relics of the war, a Sherman, repainted and polished, and across from it, a Tiger II, massive and imposing even in peace. Tourists clustered around the German tank, reading placards that praised its armor and firepower. A guide explained how it could knock out Shermans at 2 kilometers, how its frontal armor was nearly impenetrable. Miller listened quietly, hands in his pockets. He did not interrupt to say that once, under a low German sky, a 75mm Sherman had forced crews out of 2 of these monsters without a single penetrating hit. He did not talk about white phosphorus or the way doctrine bent under the weight of reality. He simply walked over to the Sherman, ran his hand along the familiar curve of the glacis, and remembered the cramped turret, the sweat, the trust in his crew. Decades later, when films and books popularized the idea of Shermans as death traps and Tigers as unbeatable legends, Miller's feelings were complicated. He knew Shermans burned. He had seen enough hulks to never romanticize his old mount. But he also knew that reliability, numbers, and improvisation had beaten German heavy armor more often than the myths admitted. Sometimes, when asked by a curious grandson whether he would have rather fought in a Tiger, he would shake his head. "They were fine tanks," he'd say, "but it's not the steel that keeps you alive. It's the people and what you figure out when the manuals stop helping." If pressed, he might tell a shortened version of the Göttingen story. The ditch, the 3 Tigers, the decision to load smoke instead of armor-piercing. He always ended it the same way. "We weren't braver than anyone else," he'd say. "We were just scared enough to get creative." Then he'd change the subject, leaving the details and the white clouds rolling over dark German steel back where they belonged, in a field in 1945. In the great catalogue of World War II battles, the skirmish north of Göttingen is a footnote. No cities changed hands because of it. No generals wrote memoir chapters about the moment one Sherman used smoke shells to gut a Tiger platoon. Official histories compress that April day into a few lines about armored resistance overcome on the road east. Yet the story of Belle and Staff Sergeant Miller offers a lens into something larger than a single engagement. On one level, it is a technical anecdote. A 30-ton medium tank with a 75mm gun, statistically outmatched and out-armored, survives by exploiting an overlooked property of its ammunition, white phosphorus. Issued as a smoke and marking round, becomes an anti-crew weapon when fired directly at the armor of a heavily protected tank. Ventilation systems designed to clear gun fumes become conduits for choking smoke. It is a reminder that engineering choices have unintended, often lethal, consequences in war. On another level, it is a story about doctrine under pressure. US armored manuals did not recommend firing WP at tanks. They preached maneuver, combined arms, avoidance of frontal duels with superior armor. Those principles were sound. But on a muddy road, with tank destroyers elsewhere and fighter bombers grounded, a young sergeant made a decision the doctrine did not cover. He did not do it to prove a point. He did it because 5 lives sat inside a thin-skinned vehicle facing an enemy weapon designed to kill them at twice the range they could reply. In that moment, the war narrowed to the inside of a single turret, to a commander weighing the ethics of using a terrible chemical agent against the reality that inside the Tigers were men trying to kill his crew. Wars are often remembered in the metal, the silhouettes of Tigers and Shermans, the numbers, the armor thicknesses. But inside every silhouette were people like Miller and his German counterparts, making rushed, imperfect decisions with incomplete information. The duel north of Göttingen does not prove that the Sherman was secretly superior to the Tiger, nor that bravery alone conquers technology. It shows something more nuanced, that even when the numbers are against you, understanding your tools, your enemy's vulnerabilities, and your own fear can create fleeting, precious advantages. As myths about invincible German armor and death trap, Allied tanks continue to circulate, stories like this complicate the picture. They remind us that machines, however formidable, are only as decisive as the humans using them, and that improvisation at the edge of doctrine often decides who comes home. If this story has moved you, stay with us. There are countless other moments like this. Obscure fields, nameless crossroads, split-second choices, where ordinary crews in ordinary machines bent the course of battles in ways big histories barely note. Subscribe, share this episode, and tell us in the comments which untold story of World War II armor you'd like to see next. Because as long as we keep listening to voices like Miller's, the war remains more than silhouettes in a museum hall. It remains a human story, in steel and smoke, courage and improvisation, played out one desperate decision at a time.